Amazing. And I'm just going to chat for a moment and give people a few more minutes to pop in. And for those of you who haven't used Zoom before, there's a little chat function, so you can pop that up and communicate with each other. It's just at the bottom of your screen if you scroll your mouse over it. If you're on a phone using the Zoom app, there you have to slide the screen back and forth. And yeah, what a journey it was to arrive here today. I'll tell you, I'm not at my house right now. Our internet shut down in our entire neighborhood 2 hours ago. And, you know, I've been using Podia, which is the site that I hosted the sign up for this for years. And I have multiple programs on that site. I have never had the issues that people have been having signing up for this. And gratefully, there is, you know, almost 100 of you who were able to get through the resistance and the collective that, yeah, we're putting up some defenses about this conversation being had. So yeah, when the internet went off, I was like halfway through the presentation and I'm thinking to myself, yeah, that sounds about right. So I just started cleaning. I just started cleaning my energy, cleaning my space. I was like, there's no way this is not happening. We're going to figure it out. And my beloved Alex like got on the phone, started calling all the co-working spaces. And then we were like, oh, we have to contact our friend. Maybe she's back in town, and she was. So we're here and it's happening. And yeah, it just speaks to like, yeah, it just speaks to what is being brought through. And it actually makes me even more excited to share with you all. So let us just take a moment and just anchor into this field that we're creating together. And let us all just close our eyes for a moment. And let us all just take a nice deep breath in, filling up our bellies, filling up our ribs, filling up all the way into our heart and our throat, all the way up, filling every ounce of our body. Maybe this is the biggest breath you've taken all day, and just holding that breath for a moment together. Feeling what it's like to be full. And together releasing a big sigh. Letting everything out, and then just holding the breath out for a moment to just get that feeling of what it's like to be empty. I'm returning to how your breath wants to breathe in this moment. I'm just going to invite us all to create a shield of protective energy around us all. And you can imagine a big golden bubble of light that surrounds you and expands out into the space if there's anyone else that's in the field with us. And I'm expanding this out for anyone who comes in and watches this later, so that we can have this dialogue, so that we can talk about something that was very resisted in the collective unconscious without being disturbed. Creating this safe and sacred space for us to go into fear through love. I'm inviting all of our guardians and our guides who wish to be here with us to hold this field of golden light, to be here with us now, and to be here in the field, continuing to hold this light for everyone who comes in and watches this later. All right. Yes. Let us begin. So I have prepared a presentation. I put together a fun little PowerPoint that really it just has a bunch of gifts on it, because we're talking about fear today, and I want us to laugh. I want it to be something that we approach from a lightheartedness, because it can be triggering. It can be emotional. it can bring up a lot of stuff in our world. So the intention was to create space for laughter and for lightheartedness to be involved in a conversation that can be sometimes pretty dense and pretty heady, right? So for those of you who have played with me before, you know this is not normally my MO to create PowerPoints, and it was just like this whole thing that had to happen, and I just surrendered and started typing. So let me share my screen with you all. And yeah, what are we here for? We're here for this Master Heart Call, this What is Fear Master Heart Call, and really talking about everything that is involved with fear, right? And you see this little brain that's like stumbling down this stair step of anxiety and grief and PTSD and stress and OCD and depression and anorexia, phobia, hopelessness, insomnia, doubt, shame, panic, lethargy, right? So much that we experience on a day-to-day is because of fear, right? And we're going to really get into what that is, why that happens, and then how can we create changes? How can we shift this? So this is what we're here for today, and I hope you're all happy to be here with me, because I'm happy to be here with you all. So the next piece that we're going to be going into is how to stop this from controlling our lives, right? So how does fear control our lives? Well, you see here, one of the colors is through self-hate, right? Listening to haters, reliving your mistakes over and over and over again, fearing the past is going to recapitulate itself, that our partners are going to leave us, or that our boss is going to fire us if they call us into the office, or that if our kids' school calls us, it's because they must be getting expelled, right? Those memories that push us to think the worst and keep us in this state of anxiety, right? So today we're going to learn to throw away our colors and let ourselves be free. So before we go into all of that, I just want to take a moment to introduce myself for those of you who have not experienced working with me before in any way in a live feed or watching the replay. And there's so many, I'm just scrolling. If you put your videos on, I can see you as I'm popping back and forth, and I love seeing your faces. So yeah, I just want to share briefly with you all a bit of my journey. And I just popped over to Dawn's face, and your smile just lit me up. So anyways, yeah, this experience, this life that I've been living in has been predominantly governed by fear. And, you know, I put on a really good facade. I can like really mask fear very well. I learned that at a very young age from experiencing a lot of assault at a very early age that did a lot of crazy things to my nervous system, and essentially put me into this constant state of fight or flight, where at all times I was like living 5 feet in front of my body on edge that something was going to happen, that something was going to attack my body, and I had to like always be ready to fight. And eventually what that turned into was a lot of drug and alcohol addiction to like silence this incessant fear that was constantly inside my body, inside my mind, inside everything that I was relating with. And through my awakening, my spiritual journey, through becoming sober, through cleaning up my body and cleaning up my life, and then learning all these incredible tools to be able to support people all over the world, I had this massive life-altering experience happen where I was sitting in Costa Rica, and all of a sudden this wave of panic came through my body and took over, and it pretty much controlled my body and my life for a good 7 months after that. And it made it so that life was no longer possible as I knew it, because this intense panic was at all times governing my reality. And what I've come to learn is that all that fear that I buried deep inside of me in order to be able to live in this world and not be in a constant state of panic, because of where I was at in my journey, and because of some of the things that are happening right now on the planet and in our solar system, which I'll talk a bit about, all of that was able to rush to the surface. And I got to look at fear from a different perspective, because my mind wasn't in fear. It was a physiological response that was keeping these patterns locked into place, certain patterns in my life, in my business, in my relationship with my family, that just kept playing out. So my journey of really learning how, and some of you on here were with me in certain moments. Crystal ended up having to drive me to my home in North Carolina because I couldn't drive myself. Like, this was how life was. It was this constant state of this fear was rushing through everything that was happening in my world. So I used my support, and I went in and really, I had to make a choice that was, you either die or you figure this out. And I chose to figure it out. I sought out some of the best neurologists and neuroscientists and biologists and all these incredible minds, these amazing doctors, these cutting edge technological researchers. And I found a path that really helps me to understand what's really going on when fear is living inside of us. And the results of which I'm going to be sharing with you today to support humanity in this huge moment of time that we're in. So I'll keep my story very brief because it's really just a story and I'm not sticking to it. So here's our agenda, right? We're going to talk about what's happening right now on the planet. We're going to go into this polarity of fear and love. We're going to talk about some epigenetics. We're going to go into the 3 types of fear. We're going to look at our brain, and I call it the watered down, human language version of neurobiology, so that it just makes sense to all of us, because that's my personal way of communicating, is how can I take this really advanced kind of science-y world and put it into human talk, as I like to call it. And then we're going to go into how we can create lasting change in our lives. And then we'll have some question space. I'm going to share with you about Fearlessly Expressed. We're going to have some fun. And then for those of you who are joining me live, at the end, I'm going to be sharing with you this amazing gift, this sound journey that I created today that is using our new bowls. It's so powerful. It's this nervous system recalibration. And that's my gift to you all for joining me live today. So celebration all around. Now, why is this so important now? And I already see that the gifts are working, right? If you saw my post yesterday on social media, right, we are in a once in a lifetime chance for healing on the planet right now, based on what's happening in our solar system with the planetary alignments, the energy that's coming into the planet. We haven't experienced this since the 1500s. So we're at a time when all of our deep karmic fears and patterns and trauma is able to be released pretty rapidly. And when we can really go in and heal these fears so that we're no longer having anxiety and having stress and fearing, and that going into our financial streams, right? And then that manifesting in our business or manifesting in our relationships or in our health, and all the ways that fear shows up in our life. So right now we are in this really important moment for the collective to really choose what path we're going to continue to walk on. And with this planetary alchemy, it can be rather intense. I know that a lot of us have been having a really profound year of powerful shifts and change. So just know that we're just now really getting into the depth of it. And right now is an amazing time for us to really understand how this polarity of fear and love plays itself out. So I love this Neil Donald Walsh quote that says there are only 2 energies at the core of the human experience: love and fear. Love grants us freedom, which is ultimately what we all at our soul level are yearning for, and fear takes it away, right? Love invites our full expression and fear punishes it. Love invites you always to break the bonds of ignorance and to ultimately become free, to become conscious, to return to our purity. Right? So when we are looking at this world. We're in this duality world where there's always two sides to every coin, right? We have male, female. We have darkness, light. We have love, fear. We have happiness, sadness. We have grief, joy, right? So there's always two sides to every coin here in the way that this world that we're experiencing operates. So we have the fear side, but what's on the other side of that coin? The other side of that coin is love, and love is what allows us to connect to our soul, right? Now, you know that energy, what is the soul, right? It's that energy where all of our life creations, all of our dreams, our manifestation potential, it's where peace and harmony and ease and flow and abundance and the easiest path to life exists, right? It's all through the love, through our soul. Now, the other side of that coin, we have fear. And fear is what we call ego. And we have this today's top story, me, right? And the epitome of ego and power as a representation to that. And the ego feeds on fear. Fear is the food that the ego needs in order to survive. And the ego is the epigenetic overlay, right? So, excuse me, I'm having a mouse moment here. Okay. There we go. So, epigenetics, right? Epigenetics determines our cell's specialization, essentially. So in nature, epigenetics would be like, okay, this cell is going to be skin cell, this cell is going to be a blood cell, this cell is going to be hair color, this cell is going to be eye color, right? So we have our epigenetics that determines our, literally the appearance and also what's happening internally in our body, right? And then we have epigenetics that is nurtured, right? And this is going to be from our environmental stimuli that causes our genes to be turned on or off, which essentially means that the ego can actually change and turn our cells on or off, keep our genes locked into lower frequencies of fear so that it continues to have this food to feed on and stay alive inside of you, because the ego is the only thing about us that actually can die, whereas our soul is eternal. So when we think about nurture in epigenetics, we're thinking about what we eat, where we live, who we're interacting with, when we go to sleep at night, how we exercise, our aging process. All of these can eventually create chemical modifications around our genes that either turn genes on or off over time. And what this can also mean is that a healthy cell, when it's turned off, can transform into things like cancer or Alzheimer's or other types of disease that eventually lead us away from a state of health and balance and towards dis-ease. So why this is so important is because fear is feeding the epigenetic overlay. And then every time that we are, say, feeding ourselves actual food that, you know, maybe we're really nervous about something. We have a big meeting and we're really nervous about it, and we go and eat a bunch of our comfort food, what might be like fried chicken or peanut butter or whatever it is. And that food is not nourishing and nurturing to our body. It's feeding ourselves through our anxiety, through our nerves, which is through fear. And that will over time actually create dis-ease and distress in our body. So fear in the long run actually has detrimental health consequences, and it also continues to feed our ego self, which, remember, our soul is what allows us to experience our gifts. It allows us to share abundantly and experience the divinity that each of us are all a part of, whereas our ego takes us further away from that. So we're going to go into the 3 different types of fear, right? And our little Star Wars guy there. So the first type of fear we have is instinctual fear. Now, this is the fear that we're never really going to truly be without, because it's essential for our survival. It's what alerts us when a big storm is coming. It's what lets us know when there's danger. in our environment, when something is going to happen that could sacrifice our life, that could take our life, right? It's also that gut feeling that we shouldn't eat that flaming hot Cheeto or that Sour Patch gummy or that moldy jicama, right? It's what lets us know that what we might put into our body can eventually actually create dis-ease in some way. So this fear is actually, instinctual fear is coming from our spleen, which is the oldest organ in the human body that is fully living in the present moment. And it's constantly sending these signals throughout our body always about what's in our environment and if there's any threats to our safety. Now here's the thing. So our instinctual fear is now in overdrive, like this guy in the picture where he's a teacher and he's got like all of his gear strapped up, like afraid of the students. Because even though we're living in this modern world with so many mainstream conveniences, and most of us are not living outside in the wild where there's lions and predators that might attack us, our instinctual is fear is currently in overdrive, which is keeping us in this constant state of like, okay, is this a safe place to be? And a lot of that is coming from the next type of fear that we're going to learn about. That keeps us, our instinctual fear in our body, feeling like it's not safe here. And that is through our learned fear. And our learned fear is our negative associations, right? Our past experiences, our memories. The earlier the memory, the deeper it's stored in our brain. So our earliest memories are actually stored in the base of our brainstem, and it's very challenging to access and clear those memories. Now, when we pick up these memories, say we learn that it's no longer safe to be a certain gender or a certain race or from a certain country, and we learn that, and then that gets programmed in our memories, which we'll talk about in our brain development, to keep us in this instinctual fear that life is inherently dangerous, which keeps our nervous system locked in this fight or flight mode. And the third type of fear is our top fear. And I so wish this little guy's thing was working, because he's like Googling and he all of a sudden reads that like bacon causes cancer and he like rolls over because he's eating bacon, right? So this is our top fear. For whatever reason, he's not working. And this is what society and culture teaches us to be afraid of, right? So racism is a form of cultural fear. It's also what we're taught by the news, by media, by teachers, by family, by governments to fear, right? So an example of this in the United States, we have this infamous day, 9/11, when we had a quote unquote terrorist attack, and everyone in the US was told to now be afraid of countries in the Middle East that they would have probably never had a thought about being afraid. And all of a sudden, millions of people now had this fear because they were taught to be afraid of that, even though like chances are no one would ever in their life have an interaction with anyone that they were told to be afraid of, because it was this fabrication, right? The whole point is like, this is what we're learning. So when we're on the internet Googling the things about maybe there's something happening, maybe we have a cough and we get on the internet and we like Google, what could a cough symptoms be? And we read all these things about all these terrible things that could possibly be happening. And it actually feeds us even more fear, right? So we have our instinctual fear, our learned fear, and our taught fear. And these will be important to understand as we start to get into a bit of how this all happens inside of our brain. And there will be places for questions. If you do have them, just write them down. I'm going to be in a flow to like honor all of our time and do my best to keep this under 90 minutes. So we're going to move into what's happening in our brain when it's, I like to call it high on fear. And really understanding how fear is neurologically hardwired. So let's go to this next screen here. And Well, you just give me a thumbs up. You can see my mouse when it's scrolling across the screen. Okay, cool. So I'll point to things that we see. So essentially, what's happening is that something happens in our environment. Say I touch a stove, or I get electrocuted by my hairdryer, or something like that. That stimulus coming in from our fingers or our skin or somewhere, it travels up through our nervous system, up our spine, and it comes up into what's called our thalamus, this little green spot in the center. And the thalamus's role is to have sights and sounds, is to make sense of sights and sounds, but it's not putting meaning onto it. It's just gathering sights and sounds from the input that it's receiving from the environment, right? Then the thalamus sends that to the cortex, which isn't written here, but the cortex is going to be this sheath that kind of goes around all the jelly parts of our brain, right? All the watery parts of our brain. And the cortex then gives meaning to the sights and sound. And that information, that meaning, okay, so the thalamus just knows that there was a shock from me putting my finger in a socket or whatever, but it doesn't have meaning to that. The cortex is then what says, okay, she put her finger into a socket and is being electrocuted, right? That's how that plays out. The cortex then, if it's something that we should not do ever again, or something that should be an alarm to our nervous system, sends an electrical shock to our amygdala. And our amygdala is this little tiny yellow guy right here that's almond shaped. And amygdala actually means almond shaped in our Latin words. So that electrical shock goes to the amygdala, and the amygdala then takes this information and it sends out the fear response, right? So the amygdala, this little tiny almond bee there, is so important in governing our fear response. This is where we are trained to have a fear response, and it also governs all of our basic emotions as well. So what happens here is the amygdala gets this electrical shock that says, hey, something's happening in the environment that is threatening. Send out the signals for the fear response. So it sends out the paraventricular, which triggers cortisol, which triggers that fight or flight, right? And then it triggers this through the HPA axis, which we're going to talk about in depth, so I'm not going to go into it yet. It also sends out through the paraduct this freezing response, right? So we either have the fight of the cortisol or we have this freezing response, which also governs other feelings like dilated pupils, our heart rate increases, sweating, we get hot, all the things. Now, the amazing thing is that this whole process happens within 90 seconds. So within 90 seconds, our limbic system has taken this information, sent the synapses out, and gone through the whole fear response. And then it's done. So if you ever had anxiety or fear or worry or all the things, like, usually last more than 90 seconds. Like, can keep going on for days and weeks and months and lifetimes, right? So why does that happen? If the actual chemistry is only 90 seconds, boom, here you go. Send it out, warn the body, let the human know, pull your finger out of the socket, right? Why does it keep going beyond this 90 seconds? And that's what we're going to really talk about. So, and we'll get there in a moment. That being said, something to think about within the amygdala is that in this space is where all of our fear conditioning happens, right? So you're likely familiar with from, basic school, elementary, or not elementary, probably like middle school, high school, where we learn about classical conditioning. If you've ever trained a dog before, or a cat, or maybe a horse, or another animal, you've likely used classical conditioning, right? This little puppy ringing the bell, getting the treat, right? So another example here is mice. So Mice hear this music playing, and every time the music plays, they get shocked. And over time, that mice learns that anytime that music plays, it's going to get shocked. And the fear response of the mouse is then triggered. Well, now it's been conditioned. So now every time the music plays, the mice will have the fear response without it ever even needing to be shocked again. So this is how we learn, right? So when we continue to do the same thing, which a lot of us do in our patterns, we keep doing the same thing, we keep getting the same results, and we keep continuing to keep ourselves in this feedback loop of pressuring fear to be what we're operating through. Now, we can go and actually reverse that, and they've done studies on this. They continue to play the music without shocking the mouse, and it takes time to actually reverse that, right? Now, actually, before I go into this, another thing about our classical conditioning is that as this process is happening, as we're learning from our environment, and examples of this from our childhood, maybe, you know, we kept like making noise and our parents kept yelling at us, and then maybe they started beating us, or maybe they yelled at us so intensely it really emotionally traumatized us, or maybe we kept getting kicked out of class, and we just learned over time that, okay, whenever I do this, I'm going to get in trouble, so I shouldn't do this anymore, I shouldn't speak my truth anymore. So then we have a fear around speaking our truth, right? So our learned memory, what ends up happening is that all of these memories that we're learning, it gets stored in our hippocampus. And if we go back here, the hippocampus is this little tiny sliver in here that is underneath, like if we were looking at it from the top, it'd be underneath the amygdala. And it's holding all of the emotional memory inside the hippocampus. So now, once this memory is held in the hippocampus, we no longer need the external stimuli, because the hippocampus will have the emotional memory, and it will trigger the amygdala through an emotional memory to go into the fear response without even needing anything from the environment the next time we're in that emotional process. Does that make sense? Okay. So this next one here, contextual conditioning. This is when we start to fear the environment where we learned the conditioning for the fear response. So this is so key, because if we've constantly been having fears and thoughts around money or our relationships in our home, then our home has now been contextually conditioned to actually elicit this fear response around those things where we've had these moments inside of our house. Or maybe there was a time when you were working and you got yelled at by your boss, and it elicited this fear that you were going to lose your job, and then all the things that would fall apart after losing your job. And then what happens is you now have this anxiety around going into work, because that environment is now triggering to the contextual conditioning, right? So why these are so important is we start to see that, okay, well, once we get to this certain space and certain memories are programmed in our brain, we no longer actually need for the environment to be showing up in a certain way that would be frightening for us to be in the fear response, for us to be in this fight or flight mode. Now, the next piece here is what we call the HPA axis. And these next two axes are so important in actually getting ourselves to a space where fear is no longer holding us back, right? So when we're looking at the HPA axis, we're talking about the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, and the adrenal gland. So we're talking about how stress and fear influence our endocrine system and how our endocrine system responds to stressors. So the hypothalamus gets the information from the amygdala to send out cortisol or cortisone. And the hypothalamus then goes ding, 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 pituitary gland, we need to create this hormone cortisol. And the pituitary gland then signals to the adrenals to create the cortisol. Now, we are at a time on this planet where the HPA axis for a lot of humans is currently dysfunctional. And that is primarily a result of early onset childhood trauma. And now trauma doesn't necessarily mean you were beaten or you were molested or you were abandoned. It could be little teeny tiny things, because we're starting to realize how sensitive and open children are, especially in their infancy and their early first 7 years of life. They are just sponges, and any little teeny tiny thing that disturbs their nervous system in any way imprints a trauma. And what happens is then the HPA axis begins to be imbalanced and it's dysfunctional. And it starts to release excess cortisol then during the fear response, right? And what happens then when excess cortisol is in the body, it actually, and this is crazy, it actually fragments and distorts the way that we remember the experience. So like we could get a paper cut, and if we have this excess cortisol running through us, we could actually remember this paper cut as like this massive gash that we had that was like threatening, we're going to lose all of our blood, right? This is how we create these stories that never actually even happened to amp up, because we're so hopped up on cortisol and adrenaline, which we're going to learn about in the next axis. And it distorts the way that we remember things, right? So then when our memory has been distorted, the hippocampus ends up storing these emotional memories and experiences that, and it stores them like they were much more severe than they actually were. Where like a little, and I'm sure you've experienced this before, maybe you had like a little attitude from the checkout person at the grocery store, and like that stuck with you like a trauma throughout your day. Because the hippocampus is like remembering this as though it was like a fight with your lover that like you got smacked in the face, when it was really just like someone giving you an attitude, right? So this is how we get high on this fear, and it really distorts our reality. So what ends up getting created, and the science word for this is rumination. And this is when our brain becomes psychologically obsessed with the memories. And it becomes obsessed with the stimuli, and it constantly is looking to keep the HPA axis like in the stress response. So it stays obsessively thinking about these things that have happened, obsessively worrying about money, or obsessively worrying about, you know, what's going to happen to the future of the planet, or what's going to happen in our business, or what's happening with our health. It becomes this obsession. And then obsession then keeps our HPA axis seeking for things to keep that cortisone pumping, because then we just get used to living from this sympathetic dominance mode. And we'll talk about that in a moment. So the rumination actually goes in and it changes, it alters our brain chemistry through altering these memories, and then altering memories that we don't even remember, right? Memories from our childhood that, you know, might be suppressed for whatever reason. It can go in and actually alter those memories, so that when we go back into those memories later in life and start to heal them, we remember things that might not have ever even happened. Which is why one of the most powerful things to healing things that happened in our childhood actually doesn't involve us needing to remember it, because our memory is possibly skewed to begin with. So when the HPA axis is functioning properly, its role is to say, no more cortisol, and it turns off the cortisol, which then shuts down the fear response, right? So it's so important that our HPA axis is working properly to keep us in our hormonal balance, right? And there's like some really crazy statistics in the world right now about how hormonally imbalanced the human species is, and all the things that are, you know, the results of that now. So the next axis, and these two work together, and you'll see in this picture we have the HPA coming down this side, and then what we have is called the SAM axis, which is the sympathetic adrenal medulla. And this SAM axis governs it essentially triggers the adrenal medulla, which is a gland on our adrenals. It's a teeny tiny little thing at the edge of our adrenals that signals the release of norepinephrine and epinephrine, which is essentially adrenaline, right? So on one side we have cortisone, on the other side we have adrenaline, right? And these two are going to be our sympathetic nervous system. It's what jacks us up, what gets us in that like hyper anxious mode, and it runs the blood, and it's what happens when, like, you know, a mother's child is caught under the car and she all of a sudden can lift this car because this cortisone and adrenaline boost that she gets through her SAM axis, right? So what happens between these two? Our SAM axis and our HPA can be triggered one of two ways. It can be triggered from the bottom up, which is essentially something actually happens in our environment that runs that signal up our spine, up to our thalamus, up to our cortex, and then to our amygdala, right? Now, that would be something that we would want to have a fear response for. Maybe there's a grizzly bear and it's like really angry at us, and we're like, okay, we need this fear response right now to get our body to do the things to like get out of there, right? Now, the other way is top down, and the top down is coming in through the hypothalamus and these memories that it's holding on to. And we actually don't need any environmental thing to happen to trigger the hypothalamus to send signals to the amygdala, which then triggers both the HPA and the SAM axis to start releasing the fear, stress, panic, all the thing hormones, which creates all the sensations, the heart palpitations, the sweaty palms, the dilated pupils, right? The change in our breath. Okay. So let's just take a little recap before we go any further. We've gone into the 3 types of fear, right? Our instinctual, our learned, and our taught. We talked about how we're storing these memories in the brainstem and in our hippocampus that then trigger this fear response without even having any external stimuli anymore. And we talked about how our nervous system, the sympathetic role, triggers this fear response as well. Now, this is where it gets really, really fascinating. And this is the last thing that we're going to go into that's like our sciencey stuff, because it's so important. And this is what we call the RAS, the reticulating activating system. And this system is a few nerves that meet in the brainstem. And if we remember, our deepest core traumas, our deepest core wounds, things that are happening in our mother's womb, things that are happening in our birthing process, things that are happening in our infancy, our childhood, these are our deepest core wounds that get lodged all the way down into our brainstem. And these 3 nerves, the RAS system, they're so important. They help us to filter information, right? And it essentially takes what we focus on and it creates a filter for it. So we all have filters for our names. We'll use this as an example. Now, if we're in a loud, crowded space, you think about a time you've been in a loud, crowded space and like you really couldn't make out what anyone was saying because everyone's talking and it's all kind of just blurring together and you're really filtering it out. And then all of a sudden you hear someone in the distance call your name and you hear that. You just hear it immediately. It's because the RAS system has a filter that says anytime your name is called, you hear it. So it's filtering information, and it's letting us know what information from our environment is important, right? So what this does is the RAS system, then it actually seeks information to validate our beliefs. So it's seeking for someone to say your name to validate the belief that you are Crystal or Dawn or Casey or all your other names in here right now, right? Without, we don't even have to think about it, right? It's just happening. And it filters the world based on the parameters that we're giving it. So if we have a belief that money is the root of all evil, well, then the RAS was going to filter all the information so that we're only receiving information from our environment that validates that belief. If we have a fear that a certain type of person is someone to be afraid of, then the RAS filter is going to only show you the people in the environment that are like that type, that are bad or wrong or harmful in some way, right? So essentially, if we have, let's say, maybe we saw a movie where someone was attacked by a dog, and we picked up a belief that a certain type of dog, let's say pit bulls, are dangerous and you should be afraid of pit bulls. So now, even though there are so many amazing, beautiful, loving, kind pit bulls in the world, the RAS is going to ensure that you only ever meet pit bulls that are dangerous, to validate your belief that pit bulls are dangerous and should be afraid. You should be afraid of them, right? So the RAS helps us to see what we want to see, and then it influences all of our actions, right? So when we have all these deeply stored beliefs that we picked up in our childhood, and they're stored in our brainstem, which is where this RAS is, those are the deepest programs that have filters on the RAS, which is when we start to see those long-standing patterns, ancestral patterns. Okay, why is every woman in my family constantly having the same fear or this same type of relationship? Because that is what they've had programmed into this RAS, down into the brainstem, and it's just getting passed down from generation to generation, right? Right, this is so huge. You guys like grasping this? Like, when I learned about this, it was like, how do I change this? How do I get to the RAS? Do I eat more raspberries? Does that work? Right, okay. So we can actually train our RAS. So good news is we can train these nerves, right? We can train them to work with us in the law of attraction and things like that. We can train it to only let us see the amazing things that we want to be manifesting in the world. That being said, we gotta first go in and clear up and reprogram those deeper ones that are keeping these fear cycles in place, right? So through actually merging our subconscious that is in our brainstem with our conscious, we can actually go in and add new filters, right? Like, for instance, most of you in here know that I underwent a name change around a year ago, and I no longer hear my old name. It's like the filter is gone for that old name, right? So we can change these really deep core filters, right? It is possible, right? But first we have to go in and see the fear filters that have been put into place, right? Okay, so before I go into that, I've got one more thing to share with you, and this is the other important key, right? So we have the first key of the RAS. The second key is our prefrontal cortex, this beautiful, beautiful part of our brain right here that is vital to turning off the stress response. Now, they haven't done human testing with this yet, but they've done a lot of testing with like rats and mice who actually have very similar brains to humans for these types of tests. And we're starting to learn that the prefrontal cortex, we can actually stimulate our prefrontal cortex and change our stress response. The amygdala sends us into a fight or flight stress response, right? It sends us into this like, boom, I gotta like react to my reality through stress and anxiety and all the things and worry, right? But our prefrontal cortex, we can actually bypass our amygdala and activate our prefrontal cortex. And we're starting to learn that that will actually manage our stress response. And it will stop us from going into the amygdala, the, right? I'm just going to call it that from now on, the response. Now we all know what that means, right? So our stimulation of our prefrontal cortex, we're starting to learn is this like light switch, right? We can just flip this light switch and change our reality. And I've been doing so much work with my prefrontal cortex because like I needed a light switch to turn on. Like I wasn't able to drive my car or go to the grocery store, any of the things. It's like, where's the magic switch, y'all? Because I need to flip it immediately, right? And I'm starting to learn through experience and having it actually change my reality so I could even be having this call with you all. Driving here by myself because our internet was out. That this magic switch really does work, right? So ultimately, when we're stuck in this sympathetic dominance, in these memories, right, we have to take a holistic approach to our brain. We have to take a holistic approach to our life, our memories, our nervous system, if we're going to effectively create lasting change, right? So now we're going to go into the 3 ways to stop fear from controlling your life. But first, let's see if there's any questions. So I'm just going to stop the share for a moment and see if anyone has any questions. And if you do have any questions, yeah, you can just unmute yourself, or you can raise your hand, or you can type them into the chat. I think I unmuted you, Emily, if you want to try talking, unless there's 2 Emilys. Oh, there are. Okay, so Emily's question is about the methods that have worked, so we're actually going to go into those now. So we're going to go right into that. All right, let's get this back in our screen share. Sweet. So the first step in the first step in stopping fear from controlling our life is through memory clearing, memory wipes, that's what I like to call it, right? Which takes a systemic approach. We have to address what's happening in our brainstem. We have to address what's happening in our hippocampus. We have to address what's happening in our limbic system and our prefrontal cortex, right? And then we have to address what's happening in our nervous system that's like holding onto these things. Now, there are some incredible technologies that can be used to access these parts of the brain, because I'll be real with you, like I was at a space where I thought I was very stabilized, and then all of a sudden like got really deep into my brain through some of the work I was doing, and all of a sudden learned, oh nope, your whole body is like in a constant state of panic, like at all times, that you've been just really good at masking, right? So we really have to get down in there. And, you know, I will say that the best things that I have found are various technologies that use light and sound to send signals into those parts of the brain. Now, I'll share about some of those technologies as we move forward in this. But as far as other things that work, hypnosis has been known to be able to get in and access these parts of the brain as well. Now, when we get into the brainstem, it's questionable whether hypnosis is going that deep, but the hypnosis has been able to get people into the sympathetic space. And if you have a hypnotherapist that's really trained, knows how to access these parts, they should be able to do that. That being said, you know, I'm a huge believer in merging technology and spirituality. I believe that they are destined to come together to evolve our species away from self-destruction, right? So my process of accessing these have been through utilizing technologies that I'll share with you on this call. But otherwise, other ways of also doing memory wipes that are free and don't cost anything. Ho'oponopono, if you're familiar with the ancient Hawaiian cleansing, it's a clearing technique. I'm teaching it right now in my other course. That's something that you can utilize, right? I was using it like the moment our internet shut down today, I was like, okay, I'm just gonna start cleaning and everything's gonna work out. And it did. I found this beautiful calm, super high vibe to have this call, because that's just how it works when you're cleansing and cleaning. So if you are diligent with it and if you keep working with it, it will work, right? So the next step is creating new patterns and programs in the RAS, right? So this is through feeding new beliefs, right? This is when I like to call it mental kung fu, right? You got to be on it at all times, looking at the beliefs that are coming up and, proactively clearing them out, right? Because you're the one that's programming the RAS, right? Based on what you're choosing to feed your energy towards in your mind. So what beliefs you're choosing to continually feed is what the RAS is picking up. So just like we alter our subconscious memory through habits, we have to continually feed these new beliefs into our subconscious, which will effectively change the RAS, right? But you gotta be on it, like all the time. That's why it's called mental kung fu, right? This is not the path for like, oh, I'm just gonna like wait, right? I'm just gonna wait for it to happen. Like, it doesn't work that way, right? It's a journey that requires your 100% focus, commitment, and devotion, because otherwise these patterns are deep and they will not change without your effort, right? So feeding in new beliefs. This is when, like, having 40-day this and that, where you're like committing to something for a certain period of time, can be really effective of changing things in your life. And it's also why it can be really challenging to show up to those things, because you have patterns and your RAS is looking for, it's like if you have a pattern of just like, okay, you're going to start working out, right? And you're like, I'm going to wake up every day at 6 a.m. and I'm going to start working out. But your RAS has a belief that says waking up at 6 a.m. you're not going to be energized. So like the alarm goes off and you're just like, no, I'm just going to turn that off. I'm just going to go back to bed, right? So you have to be diligent to push through when the program says, no, that's not what you're supposed to be doing. This isn't what you really want, to change it, right? So you got to have this like kung fu mentality to it. And that's also when the technology becomes invaluable, because it can completely bypass your conscious mind and go right into your subconscious. And the third thing is through recalibrating our nervous system, right? Bringing our nervous system back into harmony and balance. And the ways that we do this, through mineral rebalancing. If our minerals are off, our hormones are always going to be off, period. And our food supply, our soils, they're just challenged right now, right? Which means that we're all minerally challenged, right? For instance, if we don't have enough chromium in our diets, we cannot shift ourselves out of the fight or flight mode, right? These little tiny minerals, they are our foundations, right? And chromium is actually the only mineral that you need to shift out of anxiety and panic and fear. So jot that one down. Other ways of bringing our nervous system back into balance: breath work. Various different breath work techniques are incredible at restoring our nervous system. Qigong, yoga practices, herbs, right? Working with things like CBD. Though I would be mindful to not work with that if you have any type of liver damage, or any type of issues with detoxification, because it can be really intense on the liver, right? Other herbs like ashwagandha, albizia, right? Guebiton, which is a type of Chinese herb that heals our blood and our spleen, and it's incredible, right? So herbs are a really great way of rebalancing our nervous system as well. Nutrient therapy, which means food, right? What we eat. They're actually foods that trigger a fight or flight. Acidic foods are going to trigger our body to be in that fight or flight mode, right? We want to limit our acidic foods to 20% of our diet, 80% of our diet on the alkalining foods. Okay? And then restoring the HPA axis through, these neurological recalibrations that happen with these incredible technologies that I will share with you in a moment here. Let's see what we've got next, which is now the Fearlessly Expressed space. So Fearlessly Expressed is something I am so excited to be sharing, which is the new way to play with me in this life through a group container that's actually group and one-on-one support. And we're combining the ancient wisdom through all of these practices and teachings of breathwork and sound and yoga and movement to recalibrate the nervous system. That's also paired with cutting-edge technology. So you're actually going to be receiving a gift kit with this amazing brainwave entrainment device, some amazing herbs and supplements and all the things that essentially will help you to hit all those points and bring them back into balance and harmony. And Mother Earth herself, which is included in those herbal tinctures. And, I was really mindful in the creation of this to not go into any of the old school, right? Right now is when I would use all the fear tactics to pressure you to buy this. And I'm not going to do that, because that's the opposite of what this is, right? So if you want to learn more about Fearlessly Expressed, which I highly recommend, it's going to be amazing, just check out the website that's on the screen, rememberwhyyourhere.com, which is my new site. If you haven't gone and checked it out, check it out. I spent a lot of time and energy, a year, aligning myself to bring through this Remember Why You're Here. So just even give me some feedback. I'll appreciate it and love it, because I love the feedback. That being said, Fearlessly Expressed, and we can hop on a call. You can schedule a call with me to learn more about it. I talk about the technology on that site as well. That being said, I don't give it away of what it is, because that's a special surprise for you, and can't give away all the insider gifts that are going to be inside of it. That being said, it's an amazing neurofeedback device that changes our brain chemistry, and it's what I've been using. And I thank the heavens and the source and the creator who moved through these brilliant humans to bring through this device, because I don't know how I would have navigated getting in there without it. That being said, I also don't feel like that device would have operated as quickly if I didn't have all the tools of using breathwork while using it, and doing sound things while using it, and working with the mantras and the clearing things while using that device, which take it even deeper. So I want to share with you all your gift, and I'm going to stop sharing this now. Put this recording back here. So does anyone have any last questions that they want to ask? I have the chat box open here, or you can unmute yourself. Oh, where'd the chat go? I had the chat box open. Sometimes when I screen share, things just pop away. Well, I'll stop screen sharing for a moment here. Let's see. Can I put my website link here? Absolutely. Let me type that in right now. Go check it out. Let me know. Set up a call with me. There's a link for us to have a call if you have any questions about it. This is something that I really wanted to create that was going to be, and also for those of you around the world, there's worldwide shipping for the gift pack with the tech and everything that's going to be in it, and there's no additional costs to the program for that. We're going to get it to you. Everything is going to happen. The program is being run through December through March. That being said, the last day to sign up is the end of October, October 31st, because I'm going to take that month to make sure everyone gets everything they need, especially like when I ship to Australia and things, it takes a few weeks. So yeah, the last day to sign up for that is going to be November. And someone asked me to spell the herbs that I mentioned earlier, and I'll be real with you, spelling is not my thing. So what did I mention? Albizia. And I'm just going to spell it how I feel like it's spelled, and Google will correct it. So I said Albizia, we had Guebitang, we had CBD, which that's easy one to spell there. What else did I say? Those are just flying off the seat of my pants. Ashwagandha, and I think I might have mentioned Chandra. Okay. Spelling is an interpretive art. Yes, I think that was all of the Albizia, Guebitang, CBD, ashwagandha, Shishandra berry. So yeah, as far as CBD is concerned, there is a lot of inferior products on the market. You really want to be sure that you're getting something that's liposomal first and foremost, because otherwise we can't take it into our body. We also want to make sure, yeah, chromium as well for the mineral. We also want to make sure it's sonicated. There is going to be a CBD that's getting sent out in the special gift pack that is from Quicksilver Scientifics, which is going to be one of the best ones on the market. There's also one through Recept. That being, and I can send anyone links that wants that. That being said, I'm not like into the whole MLM thing, so I can get you access to that oil. That being said, I'm not like pushing that, but it is probably one of the best CBDs that are available through Prime My Body, which is called Recept, or Quicksilver Scientifics. That's the one that we use, which is sonicated, which means that they use a sound technology to get it to a teeny tiny little size. Because look, our cells are so tiny, right? In order for us to break that blood-brain barrier and get into our cells, things have to be tiny. So minerals are super important. Where you get your minerals from, most Quicksilver Scientifics. Yeah, but I'm gonna, yeah, I'll have to see. A lot of their things are, you have to be a practitioner to order from there. I am gonna be using the CBD that is from Quicksilver in this. And the only thing I would say, you know, getting CBD from a local farm, they might not be doing these practices that actually allow it to get into your cells, because you do have to have advances in technology to do the liposomal, to do the sonication that gets it down to that tiny little nanoparticles. Yeah, so some of the Quicksilver products you can order as customers, people are saying here. That being said, yeah, and using CBD, like the liver, a better way of using it if you're having liver things is actually just rubbing it into your pericardium meridians and things like that. But that's a whole other thing. These are all just things that can support you if you choose. Does anyone have any other questions that they want to ask or share or communicate? Let's take a tag here. Beautiful. So let us just say that, you know, navigating this world, yes, there will be a replay available, because I see Sonia just popped in here. I will send out the replay. Hopefully tomorrow. Our internet is kind of questionable when it's going to come back on, and I'll probably leave here right after this call. So sometime tomorrow, maybe this evening if our internet's on. so funny. I'm just so happy that this transmission came through and everyone was here and it flowed with no interruptions and all the things. So question is about resetting contextual. Dawn, I'm just gonna unmute you. Do you want to just?
Yeah. Sorry, that's better than me trying to type right now. Yeah, I was waiting to see if you were going to touch on for resetting the contextual fear, you know, like all the different ways where we learn the fear and how it gets in there. So with a place, I'm thinking for Ella, I guess, and myself, but mostly for her.
Yeah, so all of the three methods that we talked about when we're covering that's going to cover your contextual fear, that's going to cover your program fear that you're picking up from memory, right? So we have to rewire the circuitry of our brain and clear the memories that are there, right, in order to shift those things and then feed in new stimulus. So like if we use the example of the experiments that they're doing on mice where they're in this cage and they're getting zapped with the music, and then they have to have continual repeated experience over and over and over again of them being in that cage without them getting zapped while that music is playing.
Okay.
And anytime the fear comes in, it's going to put you back to the start, right? So it's kind of a long path to do it that way, which is when, you know, the neural feedback, what we can do to access these parts of the brain are like, they're invaluable at this time because we have so much deeply embedded fear that has been passed down from generation to generation. I mean, a lot of the stuff I've been processing recently, it's like I'm like, whoa, yeah, I picked this up in my mom's womb and now I see it in her mom and in her mom and in her mom. It's like, how long has this been in our family?
Right.
So we got to go actually into these areas and rewire it. And, you know, I've been doing breath work and sound and all the things for a very long time. And all of this was just coming up like this year, right? Which is then what opened up this whole new world of like, wow, look at all these incredible people that have created things that access these parts of our brain immediately so that we can actually shift them without having to remember the trauma, without having to, you know, spend, you know, hours and hours and hours and all of our resources on like counseling and talk therapy and things that actually we're learning don't work to access those parts of the brain, which, you know, I was talking to a psychologist the other day and they were like, yeah, I feel like the psychology field is changing. It has to change because we have to acknowledge that what we're doing is not actually, it's not changing people, right? Depression is, in 2020, we're coming to the place, at least in America, at least in the United States, where depression is going to be the second most common disease, right? That's where we're at. And depression is fear, right? This is all fear. This is all an absence of love. This is all ego, and it changes our genetics, which is why this conversation and our willingness to actually do the work so that we're then trickling that energy out to everyone around us and then sharing the information that we receive is so invaluable right now because like we are at a tipping point on the planet. We're at a tipping point where we have a choice to make. Are we going to do what it takes for us to actually get ourselves and our biology on board with love and our neurology on board with love? Because like this is the computer, right? This is what's running the programs. As much as we like consciously are like, yeah, love and light, if our hard drive is still running on fear, that's what it's going to be.
So the technology is the way. The tech that you're talking about,
paired with your herbs, paired with rebalancing your body, right, which is essential. Your body has to be able to process. If we don't have mineral balance, we're not going to be able to actually go through these processes that allow our brain to make these shifts. If our brain is chronically dehydrated, you know how hard it is to change our brain then if it's not properly nurtured and nourished, right? So the nutrient therapy has to be a part of everything that we're doing when we are working with the technology, when we are working with the breath work, when we are working with, you know, the different modalities of cognitive behavioral therapy or whatever it is that we're also working with simultaneously.
Okay.
So I'm just going to see here some things that just popped in. Okay, I'm not sure if I missed this, if I joined it. Do you believe the brain controls the body or the body influences the brain? If I do bodywork yoga to relieve tension and exercise to release endorphins, etc., I'm detoxifying, but then so therapy and neither seem to really do anything, right? So here's the thing. Our brain is the computer, right? It's just a computer. Let's just call it what it is, and for help us to understand it better. Right? It's running all these programs that make the whole system work, right? Make us able to have these conversations with each other. Now, two things are happening. Our body can have a pain response, and that's going to send a message up the spine to our thalamus that's going to let our brain know something's happening and we need to act in a certain way. So our body can influence the signals that our brain sends out, right? And then also our brain influences our body, right? So then our brain can have just these fragmented memories and things that come up that then send signals to our body and have our body react in a certain way. For instance, like bodywork yoga, these are also two things that I do a lot of. I am a huge believer that everyone should be getting massages and doing body work, whether it's through foam rolling at home to get into that tension or through finding incredible body workers that can help you to release these areas. That being said, I found that without the emotional releases and without the active process of rewiring my brain whilst in that body work, the tension just keeps coming back. The knots just keep coming back. Because these are stored in our RAS, will literally create a program that says, you have attention here. This is keeping you safe from something that you don't know about. And until that program no longer says you need this tension in order to keep you safe, that tension is going to keep coming back, right? Which is why, like, through this whole process, I'm recognizing if we don't include the neurology of our brain and really get in to understand what's going on in here, and like, most people don't have any idea what's going on in here. Like, I skipped biology class. Like, this was all things that I had to go and learn on my own and then study because I had extensive brain damage from horseback riding and from then creating a world where I passed out a lot and hit my head a lot. And then I was like, okay, well, I created this life where I now have to learn about the brain, which is a blessing because then I get to share all this information. So I'm super grateful for all the stuff that brought me here to share about this and to like know that, I mean, like Crystal, like I'm driving myself now and I'm going to yoga classes on my own. I'm going to grocery stores by myself. And like Crystal saw me, like I was like, I can't do it. Like my body was like, no, it was in the space that it could not relate with the world around it. So the path works, like it works. That's just what I'll say. See. Let's see. Okay, any other questions coming through? I want to honor everyone's time. I said I will definitely get us off here by 90 minutes, so we're starting to get to that point. And if anyone has any questions, I will send the replay to this, and you can email me. Again, I'd love for you to have a conversation with me if you are at all resonant with exploring Fearlessly Expressed and the amazing work that we're going to do in that and all the benefits that are going to come through it. And you'll have my email once I email you all. And yeah, if there's no more questions, I'd love to just seal our container in the same way that we began it by just, you know, closing our eyes for a moment, just bringing ourselves back into our body, back inwards. We've been staring at technology, and maybe we actually just take our hands and just rub our hands together for a moment and then just cover our eyes with our hands. And just let our eyes really just relax and relieve any tension from staring at a screen for 90 minutes, from taking in a bunch of stimuli and information, and just let our eyes relax and feel how your nervous system and your body actually is able to relax a bit more once your eyes completely relax. And continuing to just hold our eyes in this way, bringing our awareness back to that golden bubble of light that was surrounding us and all of our guardians and guides and this field of protective energy that we invoked. Thank you, thank you, thank you for being here with us and for ensuring that our message was able to be shared and without any disruptions or anything happening with the technology and all the things that wanted to possibly deflect this chance for our connection today. And releasing our agreements with our guardians and guides that they can go back out and do all the things that they love to do, and knowing that this space will always be here for those who watch the replay. And let us just take that deep breath in that fills up from our belly, that fills up into our ribs and into our heart and all the way up into our brain, and just breathe that big prana breath in. And just hold that breath for a moment. Feel what it's like to be full. And letting out together that big sigh, exhale. Emptying all the breath out, all the way to the bottom, and feel what it's like to be empty. And whenever you're ready, taking that next breath in, and if it feels right for you, maybe releasing your hands, or maybe you want to keep your hands on your eyes for longer because it just feels so good. And I appreciate all of you so much for joining me live, and for everyone who watches the replay, if you have any questions, please do email me. I love connecting with you all. I hope to see some of your faces in Fearlessly Expressed. If you have anything that you want to chat about, I'm an open book. I love connecting, so don't hesitate to reach out. I hope that you all have an amazing day and evening wherever you're at in the world. Much love to you all. Bye.